Good morning, everyone. What a glorious week this has been, and a glorious morning. So, by virtue of you being here in this room, we already know you're in the right place. I have a feeling that people who have zero interest in learning wouldn't be showing up here, right? So this is about you. This talk is about you. It's about the way that learning is emerging as a key competency for the next number of decades for every individual and every organization, and to celebrate the learning leader potential in every person in this room and every person who listens to this video. So I'm going to do a few introductions and then we'll plunge right in. So my name's Diana Larsen. My work is consulting, coaching, writing, mostly about how organizations can be more effective, and particularly knowledge work organizations. We're going to talk more about knowledge work in a moment, but Peter Drucker, anybody familiar with Peter Drucker, is the one who coined that phrase 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And we're just now catching up with him. What a brilliant guy he was. So I'm going to go through a few slides. These are some of the contributions I've made to the Agile community. Turns out, I never knew this about myself before, but it turns out I'm kind of a model builder. I like to build models, put them out there, test them, and then watch them teach me back. That's the real pleasure part, is that when you put a model out into the world, people start playing with it, and then it begins to teach you back. So that has helped me to continue to be a lifelong learner. I'm a member of a number of different tribes. These are some of my tribes. And I also want to learn about you. So we're going to do a few little demographics here. Please, do hand raising. How many in this room would consider yourselves builders? Programmers, testers, you're the ones who actually, you're the value creators, let's face it, right? Right, the rest of us just support you in what you do, right? How many managers? Oops. Okay. All right. Internal coaches? Okay. All right. External coaches and consultants? Oh, interesting, interesting. So most of you here are folks who are actively engaged in the work and in supporting the work. Anybody whose hand wasn't raised? Okay. Call out how do you characterize your role? Designer. Kind of a builder, maybe, I don't know. Okay, back in the back? Yeah, designers. Designers? Okay, all right. So, and how many of you are members of more than one tribe? Right, you've got the tribe that you work in, you've got the tribe that is sort of your affinities. Dave Snowden talks about Cynefin, right, and it being, that is a word meaning multiple belongings. And we all are there. So we have many opportunities to influence the learning of others, as well as to manage our own. So let's talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk just a few minutes about learning and how we are thinking about it differently now. Last year you had Linda Rising here. How many were here for Linda? Quite a few. She talks about a number of different topics, but one of which is about the agile mindset or the learning mindset versus the fixed mindset. So this is going to be a little bit of a continuation of her work. So knowledge work is learning work. That's one of the things that I figured out over time, that if we are doing knowledge work, if the primary contribution we are making to the thing we're building comes out of our heads and not out of our muscles and hands necessarily, then we are learners. We have to be learners. You cannot, because when you are doing knowledge work, you are always creating new knowledge, new ways of doing things, new ways for things to work together, new associations between things, new ways to describe things, right? Right? So knowledge work, whenever you hear that term, knowledge work, think learning work, right? Software development is knowledge work. It's definitely knowledge work. And that means that if we learn how to learn effectively, we increase our agility, our ability to keep up with the world, and all of those kinds of things. So how has our understanding of learning changed? I'm going to go through a few slides here, and we'll see what we think. So Melissa Daimler wrote in Harvard Business Review just about a year ago that organizational learning has become less about what goes on in a classroom and more about what goes on in the work environment. Right? It's less about people being on their own and more about having an environment that supports continuous learning, right? You know, one of my contributions is the idea of retrospectives, right? Which is about continuously learning for improvement, right? So those are the kinds of things we're looking for. And part of the reason for this is that we moved into this world that people now are characterizing as VUCA. How many here have heard the term VUCA already? Okay. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Does that sound like any place where you work? Right. It actually comes out of the U.S. Army War College because they like to create acronyms. That recognition that they could no longer send squads of people out into the field and have them be at all safe and have a chance of coming back. If they tried to send them with specific plans of action on what to do when they got there. Because it was too often that the conditions that they met when they got out there were completely different from the ones that anybody back in headquarters knew about. So it was more important that they send squads out with the ability to learn about the new environment that they were encountering and then know how to take action, whatever that new environment was. And then, about 3 years ago, Harvard Business Review published an article that said, you know, that is true about military engagements, but it kind of sounds like our business marketplace too, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And so people began to talk about this term in that context as well. And I certainly think that it applies. I mean, we may not be going out on life and death missions every day, but anybody here sitting in a world that seems static? That, where you can go to work every day and expect things to be exactly like they were the day before, the week before, the month before? Anybody back in the back, do you see any hands go up? No. Right. So today's world, the only thing useful is knowing how to learn. And Ari DeJuice says it's our only competitive advantage. How much we learn. So, antiquated is just around the corner, obsolete is just down the hall. Right? That's always chasing us. There's always a Netflix to our Blockbuster out there somewhere, right? So, and on the other hand, our lovely, I had the actual privilege of being in a course with him once. What an amazing man. So that's, when you get old, you can talk about those kinds of things. Learning isn't compulsory, right? It's just only if you want to survive. Right? He's great. So humans, one of the things that we know about humans is that we learn in the direction that we ask questions. The things that we aren't asking questions about, we don't learn about. If you stop and think about that for a moment, I learned this from David Cooperrider. This is one of the things that he taught me. We learn in the direction we ask questions. So the minute we ask a question, we have created change. We are no longer in that space that we were in before we asked that question, before we began that learning. And once we get an answer to the question, we are changed. We can never go back and be the person who didn't have that answer, doesn't have that skill, whatever the learning was. We are now changed into a person who is in possession of that learning. And it's a virtuous cycle, because once we learn a thing, we get hungry to learn more things. We get hungry to continue down that path of inquiry. Now, one of the ways that I've been exploring this lately is through the Agile Fluency model that I developed with Jim Shore, and what does that kind of learning about moving into an agile approach to doing things, what does that mean for teams and then the organizations that teams serve? So why we began that, how we got to that model was we began to think about this idea of fluency. One of the reasons that we learn is to gain fluency in a subject. If you think about languages, that's one analogy that you can use for fluency, but there are others. We are now encouraging people to come up with, what is it, where in your life have you developed fluency, and what was your progression in getting there? And it's very difficult because it's one of those things that you don't actually, once you're really fluent in a thing, it kind of goes out of your awareness. You just do it routinely without thinking about it. If you're still thinking about it, you're still gaining fluency, which is also a good thing, right? But you can't count on it yet. You're still kind of stretching into it. Once you get it, then you can just rely on it. And you always do things that way. And it's a product of practice, right? We have to keep asking those questions. We have to keep trying things out. Deliberate learning we talk about, or deliberate practice, right? So those are some things about learning. So if all that is true, if we live in this complex, ambiguous world, if the only way to keep moving forward in that world and be safe and be a person who has agency and action in that world is to be able to keep learning, what do we need to do? I believe we need 3 key characteristics. We need the courage to stand up for learning, to show curiosity, to experiment. All of those take courage. We need compassion for ourselves and others as we go through those sometimes productivity dips that happen as we are learning something new, right? We can't rely on our old skills, but we also know that when we begin to stretch into something, when we're not quite fluent in it yet, that means we're not doing it as effectively as we hope we will at some point, right? So we need compassion for that, for ourselves and for others. And then we need the confidence. We need to develop the confidence that no matter what situation we encounter, we have the learning skills that will enable us to get through it. So we're going to talk about those three things. Let's start with courage. Why courage? Why do I think courage is an important thing to talk about? Because learning presents challenges to us. And what is courage but the willingness to face the challenge, not run away from it, but stand up in it and say, I'm gonna get through you, challenge. I'm gonna get past you, and I'm gonna find the next challenge in general. So Chip Bell wrote this great article in Harvard Business Review where he says, great leaders learn out loud. Right? I love that term, learning out loud. That means we don't hide it. We learn courageously. We're right out there in front of everybody saying, I'm learning, and here's what I'm learning, and I'm willing to share it with you, and I'm willing to take you on a learning journey with me. And I'm not ashamed that I'm learning. Right? Esther and I, one time, very early after we had published the retrospective book, we spoke at a very large company that was hiring a lot of people right out of university, a lot of engineers right out of university. They were very proud that they were only hiring the best and the brightest, right? They talked about that a lot. We hire the best and the brightest. And they brought us in to do a presentation on retrospectives, what's effective ways to do retrospectives. And before we began our presentation, they warned us. They said, don't expect any questions at the end. So we always leave time for questions. Why wouldn't we expect questions at the end? No one will ask questions. What? What? You've hired the best and the brightest and none of them will ask questions? No. Because they are the best and the brightest, they are expected to already know. So they have no permission to be a public learner. I thought that was sad. I thought that was so sad. It's like you graduate from university, that's it. You got everything you need, right? And we all know that's not true. It's very sad. So the hard stuff is that willingness not to know, to show that you're curious about something. You know, those of us who were very, very curious about things in high school and always experimenting, we got called names, right? Nerd, dork, right? I'm a proud dork. I often have my tag in the back of my shirt hanging out. I don't care. There. The willingness to be wrong, the willingness to be messy and inefficient as I learn about what is the right way to do a thing. Okay. The courage to challenge your assumptions. Peter Senge and some of those other folks gave us the ladder of inference and some of those other tools to help us identify and challenge our assumptions, to not always just rest on what we already know. That way lies peril. There be dragons. So stop a minute and just think. What was the last thing that you unlearned? What was the last thing you unlearned? When was the last time you checked your assumptions about something and were open to things being different than how you expected them to be? For me, that was last night. That was last night. I have to admit, I did not expect the kind of lodging that I ended up in last night. I'm kind of the accidental tourist. I travel around the world from hotel room to hotel room, and I know how they work, and I know where everything goes. I open my suitcase, I put this here, that there. I was in a whole new space last night, much like many of you who are staying here, right? I had to sort of learn how I was going to be in that space for 3 days, because it challenged my assumptions about what it means to travel and stay in a place, right? Make time for learning. For yourself, for your teams, if you are in a management role, particularly, make time. That's part of the environment you are creating for people and your company to be successful, is to make sure there is the slack that you need, both for resilience and for people to learn new things, right? Make time for learning. There's a book called Leading Organizational Learning that I bought many years ago, and it has about 37 different essays and articles in it. Out of that entire book, only 2 of the articles are not about knowledge management, which basically is how do you codify and store stuff, right? That nobody ever then looks at again, basically. Only 2 of the articles were really about learning, and one of them was from this guy, Elliot Mazie. And Elliot Mazie was one of the pioneers of online learning. Computer-aided, back in the day, it was called computer-aided learning, because there wasn't online yet, right? And he was one of the pioneers of that. And he's been looking at this question of, what does it mean to be a learning organization? What does it mean to be a learning team for a long time? And he has a wonderful story in that book about an organization that learned how to learn from its own experiences, to rapidly translate the experiences that happened in one store. It was a retail giant, in one store to what was going on in another store, so that good practices could spread very quickly. And he had an interesting challenge. What if speed to learning was your best metric? What would that look like? I think that's such an interesting question. What if speed to learning was your key metric? How fast can we learn? How would you measure that? What would you look for? So, inspiring leaders enable results. That means if you want learning to go on in your organization, no matter where you are placed in that organization, whether you're a formal titled leader or a member of a team and leading from that place, it doesn't matter. But as a leader, are you inspiring the people around you to learn? Rosabeth Moss Kanter is she's written books called Dancing with Elephants, and she's written a lot of books about organizational change and so on. She's kind of a leading thinker in that area. And she says, leaders are more inspiring when they learn than when they teach. A lot of folks are now doing courses for managers in how to ask powerful questions, right? Not to have the powerful answers, but how to ask powerful questions, right, that stimulate your own and others' learning. So that's courage. The courage to stand up, publicly be a learner, and to create that environment for other folks. So let's talk a bit about compassion. That's next. When Chip Bell said, leaders who learn out loud, there's a compassion part of that as well. It means being willing to, nurture and give yourself the space to be a learner. and to extend that to others. There are a lot of obstacles out there to learning. You know, it's hard to take the time. I might look silly. If I don't already know, I mean, those poor people at that company, if I don't already know, will they think I shouldn't have my job? Well, if I take time to learn, isn't that selfish? Isn't that time I'm taking away from the team or my family? Or clearly, you've all answered that question to some, at least for today and tomorrow, right? So there are a lot of fears and roadblocks to learning. And really the only way to get through those is compassion, is giving ourselves some slack, giving ourselves support for that. Saying, I know this is hard, but you'll get through it, and let's figure out what's the best way for you to learn this, right? To understanding how we each learn ourselves and letting the differences in that be okay. Robert Marshak wrote in a book called Covert Processes in Organizations, or Covert Processes at Work, I think maybe it is. And he talks about whenever we are in a situation of a group of people, there are all the things that we sort of know that are happening, but there are all these other things. He calls those the things that are out on the table. But there are these other things that are under the table. Our fears, our concerns, our baggage, maybe, that we're carrying around that, are getting in the way. And we don't share those at work, generally speaking. We just keep those to ourselves. And then there are the things that are in the clouds, and he calls those kind of our desires, our hopes, our wishes. And too often we don't share those either. So we can't support each other in our learning because we don't know what you hope to learn next, or where you'd like to be in 3 years or 5 years, or that you wanted to go spend 3 months in the south of France and you really need to learn French, right, to get along. We don't necessarily know that about each other. And that's another way of showing compassion, about making it okay to talk about those things and the learning that we need to do that goes along with it. So that means as learning leaders, we need to create some safe spaces for learning. That, again, David Snowden, that safe to fail stuff, right? Safe to take risks. Safe to feel the edge, but not be sliced by it, right? And that comes back to the whole ideas around learning and psychological safety. Anybody heard about psychological safety lately? Right? This has been a big topic on in the social medias, on the Twitters and in those places. A lot of people talking about psychological safety in Harvard Business Review, in various places. Google did a whole study on what made their teams effective and came out, and psychological safety was a key thing there. But what does that mean, and how do we get there? And Amy Edmondson has done quite a bit of study in that, and somebody else named Mac Sakaguchi did a presentation recently at a conference, and he summarized some of her work. And I loved this first one. Frame the issues, frame the work as a series of learning problems. Right? What if your work on the daily basis was, what's my new learning problem? Wouldn't that be cool? I think that would be very cool. Modeling curiosity, making it okay for other people to be curious and to be in inquiry. And be able to admit when you're wrong or when you don't know something. That's learning out loud. I love this, David Kadavi, in Design. He has a blog post called Design for Hackers. And he says, before you get good at anything, you have to give yourself permission to suck at it first. You don't go from, I don't know this, to, I'm a master, right? Somebody said 10,000 hours. We've learned that's bunk. But we do know that there is a gap between I don't know anything about this and now I'm a master, right? So somewhere in there is the suckiness. You're going to encounter the suckiness in there somewhere. You have to give yourself permission for that, and you have to extend that permission to others. So I'm going to teach you something. So imagine that you were at work, and I don't know, let's take something small. Let's say you're going into the coffee room and you tripped over the garbage can, right? Everything goes flying. I mean, we won't do a work-related thing, but you tripped over the garbage can, everything goes flying. Makes a lot of noise, clatter, bang, right? What's your response? Oh, God. Oh, God. I have to start picking this stuff up. I better start picking this stuff. I don't want anybody to see. Or do you say, how fascinating? When I walk in and the garbage can is right in front of the door, I trip over it. How fascinating. How fascinating, right? You do it 3 times. Anytime you encounter something that you think is a mistake or an error, you look at it and you say, what an opportunity for learning and improvement here. How fascinating. So I want everyone to stand up and do this with me. We're going to do it 3 times. Everybody up. Everybody up. This is also known as the failure bow in improv, if any of you do improv. All right. 1, 2, 3. How fascinating. How fascinating. How fascinating. You can give it different inflection, too. Yeah. Okay. Sit back down. How fascinating. Right? It enables us to look at what is the improvement we can make here. If we do this, we shut down our learning. If we do this, we're ready to take action. It's a radically different stance on many, many dimensions. So stand in inquiry. Make sure that you are taking time to reflect, that learning is a priority, that you've identified and cultivated a sense of wonder. I was walking along, I just went out for a walk after dinner. I stayed in Falmouth on the first couple nights of the week, and I was out walking after dinner, and I was walking along, and there was this sign that said, Gillen June Garden. And I went in, it was like a fairy palace. It was, if you've never been there, I recommend it. It was an amazing place. It was, like half a block's worth of land. But some people had done some amazing learning there about plants and about how to create a space. It was fascinating. I walked around in awe and wonder that somebody had created something that beautiful. Level up the learning for everyone. Look for ways to help your colleagues, your peers, your managers, the people who work with you. Help them to do their learning as well. Pass it on. The compassionate thing is to pass on your passion for learning, your willingness to let other people learn. When you learn a thing, share it with other folks. Pass it on. All right. So a little bit more here. That's the end of compassion. Let's talk about confidence. Confidence comes about when leaders, learners, create conditions where learning will occur, can and will occur. Because that helps to instill resilience in us. If I know that no matter what I encounter, I can learn my way through it, that creates tremendous safety for me. Right? So we want to build that support and resilience. We want to help people set out on their learning journey. And the way we enable that is we create conditions that enable versatility, that build capability, that create agility and resilience. Those are our buzzwords. We can always ask ourselves, have I made it more? Christopher Alexander talks about the magic question, you know, which thing is this more alive or is that more alive, right? That you can use that sort of thing here too, right? Have I left this situation more versatile than when I came into it? Have I demonstrated agility to the other folks around me so they can learn more about that? Sort of thing. Margaret Wheatley talks about iterative learning, making small changes, learning in little bites. We're going to see more about that in a minute. So learning in little bites, and if you create a culture that encourages that sort of incremental learning, and we're all here at an Agile conference, so that's part of presumably our mindset, right? Learning in an incremental way, in an iterative way, building. The difference between incrementalism and iterative is that in iterative we're building on what came before, right? So I wrote with my son Willem a book called 5 Rules for Accelerated Learning, and I want to very quickly share those 5 rules with you. I know we're getting close to the end of our time, but this is a takeaway I want you to have. The 5 rules are alive, setting, fluency, obvious, and flow. No, well, I'll tell you more. So, keep it alive. Each one of these comes with a question, with a little statement and a question. So alive translates as keep it alive. How can I create more aliveness here? Now, most of the time, most of us are dealing with other humans, right? Particularly at work. Mostly dealing with other humans. And so how do we make it more alive for the humans around us? Well, we have to understand something about humans. We have to understand that humans have 5 senses, that having nature nearby creates aliveness in the setting. Being able to see outside creates aliveness. Color, things that appeal to our senses, music, anything that connects. Relationships are a very big one, right? Anything that connects us makes things more alive. So particularly, those of you who've been in a workshop with me know that I usually bring some kind of facilitation aids. We don't call them toys because, you know, toys are not tax deductible, but facilitation aids, right? So I always have something like that. I have, you know, when I travel, I usually bring pipe cleaners because they're really light, right? Colorful, sparkly, right? No matter what space I end up in, it helps to create more aliveness there. That's part of the reason. Plus, it gives people something to do with their hands, right? Which is also an aliveness thing. Keep people engaged, right? So aliveness. Setting, attend to the setting first. How can I amplify the impact of this environment so that people can learn better? And that has to do with supporting the other 4 rules. You know, how do I make it more alive? This is a setting. Bringing these beautiful flowers in here. Creating colorful posters. Have them around, right? Making sure that we're all, you know, sitting in relationship with other folks, but not too close to make us uncomfortable, right? Those are all setting issues. At work, we can create collaboratories, right? work settings where people can collaborate and learn from each other. I love this term. Somebody came up with it, and I wish I could attribute it to someone, but I think it's just a great term, collaboratory. Do it for real. This is the fluency one. How can we get closer to doing it for real? The more you practice a piece of learning in a real way, in a real setting, the better you learn it, the faster you learn it. That's something that we know. So real hands-on is better than just speculating. Learning about a thing gives us some knowledge, but it may not give us any skill in applying. Right? So we need to do that. So my friend Woody Zuhl says it's in the doing of the work that we discover the work we must do. That's how we learn. Right? We learn about our work by doing the work, and then we learn what's next. Right? Start obvious and stay obvious. How do I make what it is I'm trying to learn here more obvious, more clear? We're not into obfuscation around our learning. That doesn't really help. Clarity around what we need to learn and how we're going to go about learning it is more important. So one of the ways to do that is to make your meetings more learningful. If you really want to support learning, if you want more learning to happen in your workplace, then declare every meeting that we have, something has to be learned there. We have to be talking about learning. And so, for instance, in the daily stand-up, you could ask more provocative questions. Like, what did you learn this week? How did you apply that? What did you learn that could benefit the team? Please share. What have you learned that was unexpected or surprising? What did you learn you didn't think you were going to learn, you didn't know about? What do you hope to learn next? What's in the way of your learning? How can we make your learning give you an easier path to fluency? Right? Those are all questions that can help make your meetings more learningful. And finally, focus on flow. How do I better size and sequence the learning I need to do? You want to make sure that people are not, that the learning isn't so small that it seems trivial and people get bored by it. But you also don't want to make things so big and overwhelming that they get paralyzed. Flow is that nice state right in the middle where there's a little bit of an edge. I really need to know this thing. But not so much of an edge that you can't move forward. We talk about bite-sized pieces of learning. That's one way to think about it. What's the next bite-sized piece, the easily consumable, integratable piece of learning that we need to do? I love this little guy. He's cute. All right. So we're almost to the end now. Learning leaders give back. Not only do you learn for yourselves, but you make space for the other folks around you to learn. They pass it on. You make sure that when learning is happening, it gets spread as much as possible. Learning leaders take time to reflect, right? To think about their assumptions and what's the next thing I need to learn, what's the next thing my team needs to learn, what's the next thing my organization needs to learn, what challenges are ahead. So courage to stand up for learning and inquiry, to show curiosity, to experiment, compassion to help each other learn, and the confidence that no matter what situation you encounter, you can learn your way through it. You can learn your way through it. So what's your plan for continuous learning in your own life? I invite you all to get out something that you can write on. If you don't have your notebook in front of you or something, find a business card. You just need a small piece of paper or your notebook or something. Get something out to write on. as a, however you want to identify your tribe, right? I want to learn. What is your learning objective? So that, what is it you want to change in your life? This actually comes from John Miller, who's on Twitter. He's at Agile Schools. He does a lot of work in education, taking agility into the ideas of education. Write down your next learning challenge for yourself, coming from you to you. Carry this with you. You have your own personal learning user story, right? That's your backlog. Only one card on your backlog, right? Thank you, everybody. Have a great conference.